had a German dad. I speak German.
Right.
But people see me as a person of color.
Right.
So that's where this whole imposter syndrome comes back, you know? It's like I don't want to impersonate a person of color, but like some people see me as one, and I don't really know where I am on that spectrum. And the amount of people that I encounter in Germany that see me as a person of color is just so much higher. So I just say like, okay, you know what? I guess I'm a person of color.
This reminds me a lot of, so I watch Trevor Noah on The Daily Show. I don't know if you, and he has this little feature where he goes back to Johannesburg in South Africa to see his grandmother, and Trevor Noah, his father is Swiss, so white Swiss, and his mother is South African, so black. So he's in between, right? So he's but for me, you know, as a North American, I'm like, you're definitely black. And for him, when he went back to see his grandmother, she's showing her his hand, which is, you know, for us black or at least brown, and he's like, this is for South Africans considered white.
Wow.
Like, I am the white kid. I was treated differently when I was a kid. I wasn't beaten as much. I got special concessions because I was the white kid, you know? And I feel like there's so many parallels, right? And it makes me think of, so you had this quote from this author whose name is...
Yeah, Adichie Ngozi Chimamanda.
Oh, you got it. Yeah, very nice. And the quote was...
she says that race is not biology, but it's sociology.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah.
What do you think that means?
When I read it, I was so relieved, because that's exactly the thing that I always thought, you know. It's about how you're not, your race is not determined by your biology, basically. So if you have a German dad, for example, a white dad, it doesn't make you white, but it depends on what society says about you. So in her book, it's a quote from the book Americana. And in the book, it's about how race doesn't exist in the confines of our home. But as soon as we go outside into society, that's when it becomes a term, basically. That's when people look at us and they see a certain race. So the society basically determines if you are a person of color and not your biology. When I read it, I was just like, yes, that's exactly what it is. Because as I said, like it's this in-between thing, you know, you don't understand, you don't know, am I not? You feel like a fraud because half of you is like, yes, and the other half is like, no, basically not, no. As long as society basically tells you or gives you that feeling that you are a person of color, that's when you are one.
And it's interesting because you say, you know, my parents don't perceive me as a person of color. Person of color in the term refers to appearance, pretty much. You know, it doesn't refer so much to what you feel like on the inside, but it refers to what you look like on the outside. Or if people perceive you as looking like you have some color, I guess. Like, okay, everybody has color, but everybody has color. But like because person of color is a term that comes from North America, specifically the United States. I feel like it's a term that is very specific also to the culture of the United States, where it's like, on one hand, it's very inclusive of all kinds of people of color, but there's also like different, I think, gradations of people of color even within that big category. And I wonder, you know, how that representation might play itself out in a place like Germany or, you know, in all of Europe. Like, what will be the geography specific term that will arise? Can we use person of color to talk about Turkish people? Or do they prefer to be called something different? You know, do they prefer to be called like Mediterranean? Because Mediterranean is kind of like also this grab all catch all term, you know?
I'm comfortable using the word person of color because it doesn't specifically say what color, you know? And because I'm not comfortable saying I'm Korean, I'm not comfortable saying German. I'm basically half Korean, half German, but person of color is just such a wide term that I at least feel comfortable using it. As I said, I don't know what the German translation is, but it's got to be better than mixed breed.
I wanted to ask you again because I feel like your family situation is so interesting in the sense that you have your mother who's from Korea, you have your father who's from Germany, and then you have the four of you, you know, the four women in your family. And they've all had different experiences, sometimes a bit similar to yours, but sometimes also quite different. You showed me a picture of your family, and I did notice how, your sisters are all looking quite unique. What do you think the effect of only their outward appearance is on the way that they experience life?
It's different for each one of my sisters, because out of the 4 of us, I know that I'm the one that's perceived as mostly Korean. So when they see us in a lineup, basically, one of my sisters says people are surprised when she tells them she's half Korean because she looks incredibly German. Then another one of my sisters, everybody thinks she's Turkish. And then another one, I think she looks very Korean, but she acts very German, like in the way that she talks and like moves, so people don't really see it. And then when she tells them, then they go like, oh, okay, that's why, like, here and there and this.
Yeah, you can see the gears turning in their mind.
They start like, their brain starts working. They're like, oh, okay, this explains those things. So it's different for each one of us.
We were talking before about how it seems like within the home, race is not something that's really given much credence. It's like you are whatever you are. Would you say that that's been true for your family as well? Is that even though you're the one who's on the outside perceived by the world as more Korean, does that also come out in your family?
I mean, I'm the only one of us who speaks Korean. But other than that, I had a very long discussion once with my sister who people think is Turkish.
And so I'm guessing also that's another interesting world for her, where people might approach her speaking Turkish or treat her as if she were...
Yeah, she's a doctor, so I think it's come up. Like if she has Turkish patients, like it might have come up.
Okay, yeah.
We were both talking about it and had the same conclusion, basically, that we did not identify ourselves as either race, but we just saw ourselves as like people first, basically, and said like, you know what, I'm more artistic and she's very messy. She's gonna listen to this, I'm so sorry, but she's very messy. And like that's how we identify ourselves, and it's not about, we just see ourselves as people first, and then because we don't belong to either race, it's not A or B.
Right. After her return to Germany, we circle back to how Sarah's burgeoning identity as an artist led to her pursuing work in the video game industry, a career that traditionally isn't one with a lot of representation. I know that you've worked in the video game industry, and that's, for one, really cool, and two, relatively rare, I would say, for a woman of color to be working in the video game industry. So what was it like for you?
Well, I've only worked in the art industry for 3 years now, I'd say. I've been quite lucky, I think, because I work for a really, really cool studio. So I didn't have any problems there in the studio itself. So my experiences so far were very good. But the art industry itself was something that I just imagined to be a little different from what it was in the end. Well, when I was studying, I studied game design in Berlin, and I always had this idea of me becoming a concept artist.
Can you explain a bit, what is concept art?
Concept art is the art behind video games, behind TV shows, behind movies. So anything that has to be designed basically for the big screen is designed by a concept artist, basically. So for example, if we take Assassin's Creed. In Assassin's Creed, you have to design the different outfits. You have to design the characters. You have to design the cities, the interiors, the landscapes. But generally, it's the person who brings the visual idea on the screen for the first time. Yeah.
So it's kind of like you're helping to create the feel of the universe.
Yeah. It's a lot about like mood and atmosphere,
right,
and how does it feel like.
Right.
And that you can really submerge yourself in this world that you're creating. And when you don't work in the industry, but specifically for concept art, you always see the end product, right? You see the games and you see the concept art, and it all looks so cool. And you really want to be part of this process and like building these worlds and creating these different worlds, just that you want to be part of. Part of you wants to be part of these worlds as well. And that was my idea for like the whole time while I was studying and before I started working. Even during my studies, I kind of realized like this is a lot different from what I expected, because in reality, what you do is you sit in front of your computer the whole time, and you try to be as good as your peers.
Yeah.
And usually for artists, you're your own worst critic, so you will never reach that point of being satisfied with your work.
Right.
And you're always chasing. I kind of had a feeling that I was chasing like a carrot this whole time, like dangling in front of my own face, you know, and I was just running and running and trying to catch up, but that never happened. And then when I started working, I always thought like, oh, it's going to be better once I start working in this amazing studio. And it was a lot cooler, of course, but it was still me sitting in front of a computer the whole time and painting. I don't know what I expected, but I hadn't expected that.
Okay, interesting. But you must have had something in mind.
I think what surprised me in the end was how focused it was on creating one product. But if you're working for a bigger name, like a AAA game, for example, they will give you so many constraints, and there are so many things that you're not allowed to do, and they will be very specific on what they want, depending on how close you are to production. Like if they're still in the early phases, you can be more creative and you can give them more ideas. But when they start narrowing it down, it gets very, very specific. And for a very long time, I was working on a production track. So what I did basically was just focused on getting the product done so it could be made into a 3D object. And the actual art part, or like the creative part of it, was very, very small. And the only thing that I needed for that was the skill that I had learned with Photoshop or with any 3D tools that I use. I kind of felt like you were just putting in the nails and somebody else was giving you the blueprint and telling you, this is what I want from you.
Yeah.
And you were just doing it.
Yeah, you were just doing the hard labor.
It was kind of mindless work.
Okay.
So you were just sitting there hammering in the nails.
Right.
A lot of my colleagues just have that love for colors and for shapes and for the actual craft of painting and drawing and how strong your lines are, things like that. But for me, it was always more the people in the painting, for example. Like I wanted to know where they were going and what they were doing and why they were doing it. So I was just more interested in the whys, not in the actual, let's make this really, really pretty. But some people love that. And I really admire some of my colleagues who can sit there for sometimes 16 hours and just paint without complaining because they just love painting so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like it's quite a solitary kind of work.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. It also requires someone to be really imaginative, you know, to be someone who's comfortable with just sitting inside yourself and your mind and kind of like working with the ideas inside yourself.
Yeah. It's also a bit of a scary thing to do, I think, because being alone with yourself for so long, you will get to know yourself very well and you know your flaws.
What are the dark parts of yourself that you found through your writing process?
I don't want to mention anything in specific. I think if you spend a lot of time with yourself, you'll be surprised about what you will learn. Right now, I'm working on a young adult novel where the main character, she's sort of like me when I was 18, 19-ish. And it's about her kind of being fooled by a lot of pretty things and not really seeing what's actually going on. And she's kind of falling into a certain trap. And that's kind of what I felt like when I went into the art industry, because I was just fooled by all these pretty things. And then I went in and I was like, oh, oops, that's not really what I wanted. I've always known, I think, subconsciously, I always knew that it was not what I wanted it to be, but I wanted to be part of this industry so much that I just pushed it away and told myself, like, you know what, once you get to this point, it will be better. But now that I've gotten to this point and then I had a new point, you know, I was like, oh no, once I get to this point, it'll be better. I think that once you have that thought, something's already not right. Like as soon as you think, oh no, I just have to do this and then everything will be better. That's the moment where you should stop and tell yourself, you know what, something's not going the way I want it right now. And even if I reach that point, it won't be right. something's wrong. Like, you have to be happy with what you're doing right now, even if you're not at a point where you want to be, but you have to